I heard a woman's whisper, this soft, gentle voice, and she said to me, "Come back, come back." I knew it was Mary, and Jesus and Mary were at my bedside. It felt like heaven had come into my room. Anywhere I went, I was pointed to things that were Christian, and I truly felt like I had been blind, and now I could see. Why would God show me things that are Christian? I am a Muslim. It would make sense if Allah sent Muhammad. I started going to that empty Catholic church, and I would sit in the back pew and I would argue with the crucifix. Every day I would be there and I would tell Jesus, "You're not the Son of God," because there is no Son of God. How could that be? Hi, my name's Nikki Kingsley, and this is why I became Catholic. I was born in Pakistan in a Muslim family, and I was 4 years old when we left Pakistan and moved to Africa. And that is where I grew up. I spent my childhood in Africa, and it was a wonderful life there. And my parents were Shia Muslim, so that was the sect I was raised in. And so you may say we were cultural Muslims. I knew that I was Muslim. I knew that Muhammad was the prophet. I knew that that was the right religion, the right way to follow God. And I have 2 younger sisters, and the 3 of us grew up having a great love for God. God was very important in our life. And my parents had a beautiful marriage and a great example of what marriage should be. My father adored my mother, and my dreams were to get married and have a family. And in Islam, that is really what girls are raised to be, are good wives and good mothers. And when I was 16, my parents arranged my marriage, and keeping that obedience in mind, I didn't really object. Plus, I was reading a lot of romance novels at this time, and mysteries and romances, and so I thought this is going to be my knight in shining armor. And I had met him a couple times, but I didn't really know him. And he was 10 years older than me. He came from the Sunni background. When I turned 18 and I graduated high school, we flew back to Pakistan, and I was married. And my husband, unfortunately, did not turn out to be the knight in shining armor. That dream was crushed the day after I got married. And he seemed very distant and did not care about my feelings. Now, I was 10 years younger than him. So I was 18 and he was 28, and he just treated me like I was just a bother. Your feelings, your thoughts, your desires, your opinion, nothing matters. You're just like furniture. And I had grown up in a very loving home, and now there was this family that treated me like I was just there to serve my husband, and my husband treated me like I was a bother, and there was no emotional respect in any way. So I felt rejected, I felt abandoned, I was heartbroken. Nobody wanted to hear what I felt, thought, or anything. If I was crying, my husband would just walk away, laugh at me, and walk out of the room. And when you're 18, that's very painful. And so it was a real crushing time for me. And so I was trapped. And I turned desperately to God. Allah was going to be my only way out of this prison. And so God became my lifeline. I started reading the Quran, and I started praying 5 times a day. I would fast in Ramadan. I tried to do everything right. And in the Quran, I came across this chapter, Surah Maryam, which is a chapter dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And I would read that every single day because I had fallen in love with this woman who was so holy and so gentle. And she was the mother of the prophet Isa, who is Jesus in the Quran. And I just loved her, and I was drawn to her. And I didn't care about her son so much, Jesus, but I really wanted to be closer to this woman. And so I would read that chapter every single day. I would pray to Allah to save me. I had tried everything I possibly could to make this marriage work. I had even decided that if he could be a good father, I would stay for the sake of my children. But he was not even interested in being a father. He was completely disconnected. And when I was sick and I had said to him, if something were to happen to me, and his answer was, you'd send the kids to Pakistan. So I felt that there was no reason for me to continue to stay, because not only for myself, but even as a father, he wasn't going to be there for my children. He was busy traveling and just living his life, and the kids would be a hindrance. And that is really when I knew my decision was made, that I was leaving forever, because it would have been one thing he wasn't a good husband or was treating me poorly. But if he wasn't even going to be a good father, there was no reason for me to stay. And I was suicidal. I did not want to live. And I was close to a nervous breakdown. And that's when my dad really took notice, and he asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, I want to go to America. Something in my heart said that if I came to America, I would be saved. And so my father decided to send me some money, and he said, why don't you take the kids and go to visit your uncle and take a vacation, take a break. And I said, okay. It was summertime. It wasn't going to be a break. I was never going to go back if I ever got out of there. And when I landed in New York in '99, I was clutching my two children. My daughter was 11, my son was 6 years old. And I sat on that flight holding on to my kids because I was afraid that they could come on the plane and take my children from me, and I would have no rights. And so when we landed, I got off that plane and I wanted to kiss the ground, because I knew that I was finally free. And I didn't know how I was going to make it. I did not have degrees. I did not have money. I had a couple $100, and I had two children. But I knew that I was going to make a new life, and I knew that my children were not going to grow up. My son was not going to grow up to be like his father, and my daughter was not going to become property. And that was my promise to myself and to my children, that they were going to get an education and live in a free country. So finally, I was in America and I could start life over. And I did. I was able to get a job. I had a company that sponsored me. I learned how to drive and got an apartment and started a new life. And my children got into school. And I finally felt like I was free. And throughout this time, God had become so important to me that I had become a very devout Muslim. And my children had a Quran teacher. I was going to make sure that my children were good Muslims. And so I worked very hard for that. And finally, I had come to a place where things were normal. I was free, I had a job, my kids were doing okay. And so my prayer to Allah changed. I went from begging Allah to save me, and I went from that to asking Allah who He was. And that is not a very common thing in Islam, where you want to know who Allah is. All my friends were Muslim, and I would talk to them and I would say, I want to know Allah, I want to get closer to Him. And they would look at me and say, well, you're doing everything. You're fasting, you're praying, you're reading the Quran. I used to host religious gatherings in my home. I was doing above and beyond. And they said, well, what more do you want? And I said, I want more, because I know there is more. There was this burning desire in my heart for more of God. But I didn't know what that more was, but I wanted it. And so I would pray, and I would be on my prayer mat, prostrate for hours, and saying to Allah, who are you? I want to know you. I wanted Him to speak to me, and I believed that there could be communication with God. And But whenever I prayed, all I saw in my mind's eye was a wall in front of me, and there would be darkness and silence. But I knew that God was on the other side of the wall, but there was silence, and I couldn't get past this wall that I would see in my mind's eye. And I was so frustrated, and I didn't know what to do, and I kept begging him, "Who are you? I want to know you." Well, it was spring vacation for the kids, and we decided to go to New York City. And while we were there, one of the TripAdvisor stops is St. Patrick's Cathedral. Now, for a Muslim, walking into a church where there are idols is not something that a Muslim jumps up to do. And I thought, Allah is going to surely be upset with me that here I am walking into a church where they worship idols, and these Christians, they believe in a Son of God. They're all going to hell, which is sad because they're really nice people. But I don't know why they don't understand that Islam is the true religion. And I didn't want to go into the church, but it was a TripAdvisor. The kids were with me, and I thought, okay, Allah, I'm only going in here just to look at the building. And this is all this is, just to stop to look at the building because it's rated like one of the most beautiful buildings in New York. And so one day, I walk into St. Patrick's Cathedral with my two children, and it was a beautiful morning. And we walked in, and the first thing I saw was the stained glass face of Jesus, a picture. And it looked like he was alive, and that's the first thing I saw. And it looked like his eyes were alive, and he was piercing right into me. And it made me very uncomfortable. And I walked around to get away, and I just started walking and admiring this beautiful, magnificent cathedral. But the whole time, I felt like Jesus was walking behind me, and his eyes were piercing right into me. And the whole time, I kept looking back, and there was no one walking behind me, but I felt he was there. And near the exit, there's a little gift shop, and I stopped there. The kids were looking at something, and the exit door is right there. And I was saying to Allah, Allah, forgive me if I have offended you. I'm about to walk out. This was just a stop. I'm having this whole conversation. And as I'm standing there, I heard a woman's whisper, this soft, gentle voice. And she said to me, "Come back, come back." And I turned around and I looked, and there was no one there. And I thought I must be imagining things. But I heard it again. And she said, "Come back, come back." And this time, as I heard this sweet, melodious, gentle whisper, I knew it was Mary. It was Mary who was calling me. And with those words, I also got a knowing. She was calling me back to her chapel, Mary's chapel, which is in the back there. I didn't know when I had walked by it that there was such a thing, but when I heard her words, I knew there was a chapel that was hers, and I was being called there. I had loved her so much as a Muslim, I couldn't just walk out and ignore her. So I went back, and I went to that chapel, and I stood there waiting for her to say something, and I didn't hear anything. And I looked around at all the people, and they were reverently praying. And I thought, this is so beautiful. They love God, but they're all going to hell because they're kneeling in front of a statue. This is so sad. And I stood there. I refused to even sit. But I encountered a peace there that I had never encountered in my whole life, that my spirit felt. And I came back home, and life went on as normal. I was a Muslim. Ramadan came. I fasted, prayed, and life went on. And then it was December. I don't remember the exact date, but I was asleep. And when you're sleeping really deep and somebody just gently touches you, and you are then in that space of half asleep, half awake. I remember that the sun was just rising, the light was coming in through the windows, and Jesus and Mary were at my bedside. And in that moment, it felt like heaven had come into my room. I don't think there is anything on earth that could describe that peace. And my body was on the bed, but my spirit got up and embraced them. And it was like meeting my long-lost friends, that we had been separated for forever, and now we were together again. And the joy that I felt, I have never felt in my life in embracing them. And we embraced, we prayed together. They talked to me about my life. They showed me my whole life. And they asked me, my okay? And I said yes to everything that they showed me was going to be. And I just rejoiced. The joy was something I've never felt in my life. And while this was happening, my body was being infused with the light. And when I woke up in the morning, I physically felt like a different person. Something had changed in me. My mom was visiting, and I told her I had this dream. And she said, "Oh, it's December. You're probably thinking about Christmas, and that's why, because, dreams are just what you think about all day." And then instantly, I felt physically different. I said, "No, this was real. This was not a dream. We all have dreams. I've had dreams. This is not the same thing. This is different because I feel changed." From that day on, there was this. The only way I can describe it is like a bubble of energy that came over me, and it surrounded me, and it was holy, and it was God. But I couldn't understand why this was happening to me, because it was a tangible presence that covered me. And it went with me everywhere. To work, all through the day, this stayed with me. And what I noticed was that anywhere I went, I was pointed to things that were Christian. I had lived in the same house for a few years, driven the same road to work, but I had never noticed how many churches were on the way. But from that day on, every church was pointed out to me, and I truly felt like I had been blind, and now I could see. I'm a Muslim, and this is happening to me. In my mind, I think I'm going crazy. Why is God? I knew it was God. I never doubted that. Why would God show me things that are Christian? I am a Muslim. I have been begging Allah to reveal Himself. It would make sense if Allah sent Muhammad. That would make sense to me. But why would He send me Jesus and Mary? Because now I'm not only feeling this presence of God, pointing out to me all the things that are Christian, but I'm having more dreams, and I'm having visions, and everything is pointing to Jesus and Mary. And I don't know what to do with this. The Jesus that I knew, Isa, as a Muslim, was a prophet. He was human. There was no divinity in him. He was fully human, born of a Virgin Mary, Maryam, and he had the gift of healing. But he was human. He lived and he died. And he didn't even die on a cross, because God loved him and removed him from the cross when they were going to crucify him, and another man was put there. So this Jesus who I was encountering in my dreams and in my visions and feeling his presence, he was not a dead man who I was seeing in a dream. He came like he was alive. He came with authority and power. And it was driving me crazy, because I could not reconcile the Muslim Isa with this Jesus who was coming to me, because I knew then that Christians believe in a Son of God. And this Jesus was coming to me like he was God. But for a Muslim, that's blasphemy. How could that be? So I went through a couple years of a real struggle with God. And I was angry with God why he was doing this to me. But I couldn't deny what was happening. I never went on the internet because I did not want to research anything because I didn't want it. I wanted this to stop. And I was scared that Allah would be angry with me because I'm, now getting these visions and things of Jesus, and I don't want it, but if it's coming from God, what does this mean? And so I didn't know what to do with it. And finally, I ended up talking to a lady at work, and for some reason, I chose to tell her that I was having these dreams, and I didn't know what to do. And she looked at me and she said, "You are so blessed." And I said, "I'm not blessed. I don't want this. I want this to stop. All I asked God was, 'Who are you?' That's all I'd asked him. And why is this happening to me?" And so she gave me a rosary and she said, "I just want to give this to you. These are beads that as Christians, we pray. And I don't know what else to do for you. But if you come to my church, that would be great." And I said, "No, thank you. I don't want to go to a church, but I'll take the beads because in Islam, we pray with beads." And I thought, that was very nice of her. And I kept the rosary. I didn't even know what Catholic was at this point. I just thought all Christians are the same and all are going to hell. So it finally got to a point where I thought I have to get an answer and this has to end because I can't take it anymore. And so I made a deal. I said to Jesus, "I'll make a deal with you. I will come to your church. I'll attend a service. You'll tell me what you want. And then we're going to end this because I can't do this anymore." And so I kept my end of the bargain. It was Christmas. I picked a church down the road. Like I said, I didn't know denominations. I didn't care. They had a sign, midnight service, and I went there. And I attended. I took part in everything. The pastor did a reading. It was beautiful, welcoming. I took part in everything. And at the end, we all processed out with candles singing. And I remember going to my car with the candle and thinking, that was beautiful, but he wasn't there. And these were the words that just came from my spirit, not my mind. My spirit said, "The one who's calling you was not there." And I felt this emptiness within me. And I didn't know what that meant because I'd gone to a church. What else am I supposed to do? So I was now really upset with Jesus. I said to him, "I came to your church, you're not there, I don't know what you want from me." So I went to work and I told my friend, I said, "Well, guess what? I went to a church and Jesus wasn't there." She looked at me and she said, "Where did you go?" And I told her. And she said, "Why don't you just come to my church?" And I said, "Why is your church any different? It's all the same." And she said, "But just come to my church." I said, "Okay, I'll come, but I'm not going to do this 1-hour service and waste my time. Let's just go when no one's there, and let's see if he's there." And so we did. She said, "That's fine," and she took me to her church. And outside, the sign said Roman Catholic Church, and to me, Muslim, didn't matter to me. It was a church. We walked in, and there was no one there, and I stepped in, and I took a breath, and I said, "He's here. I can feel him." I could tangibly feel his presence, and my heart said, this is again my spirit and my heart speaking, not my head, my heart said, "He's here. I can feel him." And so I said to Jesus, "Now I've found you home. Now I know where I'm going to come and talk to you." And so from that day on, I started going to that empty Catholic church, and I would sit in the back pew and I would argue with the crucifix. Every day I would be there and I would tell Jesus, "You're not the Son of God, because there is no Son of God. Why are you doing this to me? Leave me alone." And I would just be angry and I would say that to him, and then I would tell him about my day. And by the time I walked out, I had peace. And I would show up the next day, and I was in marketing, so I had Jesus on my schedule every single day, except on Sunday, because Sundays people went to church and I couldn't go in, so I wasn't happy about it. So I couldn't wait for Monday to go tell him he's not the Son of God. And so I did that every single day. "You're not the Son of God." And months went by with this argument. And finally, one day, God had enough of me. And I walked into that church, again, alone, empty church, sat down, and I started, "You're not the Son of God." And that day, in that empty Catholic church, I heard the voice of God echo, and I heard it with my ears. And he said to me, "Who are you to tell me who I can be and cannot be? If you really want to know the truth, go and come back like a child, and I will tell you the truth." I ran out of the church. I had no doubt God had just spoken to me. That voice echoed in that church, and it was powerful, and it was firm, but it was also loving. And it wasn't a voice because I knew Allah where Allah just dictates. This was the voice of a father who just scolded me, but he also told me, if you want the truth, which means there is a truth, come back like a child. And he gave me a promise, I will tell you the truth. And so I came back. And when I walked into that church, I knew my life was going to change. I knew I was going to pay a price for this truth, but I wanted it at all cost. It was worth it. I came in and I sat down, and I emptied my mind of what I had been taught for 40 years. And I said to him, "Tell me." That's all I said. And in that instant, there was a bolt of light that came from that crucifix, and it hit my heart, and it went through my body, and I started to shake and cry, sobbing, because in front of me was Jesus. And all that my mouth could say was, "I believe, I believe." And in that moment, I had never gotten on my knees, but in that moment, I felt like my knees gave way. And I collapsed on my knees, sobbing and saying, "I believe, you are the Son of God. I believe, I believe." Because at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bend, and every tongue confess that he is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. When truth stands in front of you, you cannot deny it. I was expecting a philosophy or some words that God was going to reveal the truth about. I was not prepared to face truth himself, because truth is a person, and his name is Jesus Christ of Nazareth. He is the way, he is the truth, he is the life, and he is God. And when I accepted Jesus in that moment, and I had this infusion of knowledge that was poured into me, I'm sobbing and crying. I saw that same wall that was before me as a Muslim when I prayed, and I watched the wall crumble in front of my eyes. And as the wall came down, I saw what was behind the wall. It was God the Father. And he said to me, "I have waited so long for you." And I think about, as a little girl, there I was, I had these romance novels and mysteries that I loved. And he gave it to me in a grander way. He gave me the greatest love story, wrapped in the greatest mystery. This year, on September 13th, I celebrated 17 years since my baptism. When I received Holy Communion, I thought I was just floating in air. I couldn't stop smiling. I don't know if I can put words to how it felt. I felt complete. It was the fulfillment of all my desires. And it has been incredible what the Lord has done in these years. Obviously, I'm sitting before you and I am proclaiming the truth to you. And it's been quite a journey, I have to say, because obviously once I encountered Christ in the church and knew the truth, of course, then the question is, how do you live the truth? And I was a Muslim, so I had to go through this whole journey of letting my family know. It was very difficult, my parents especially, and trying to explain that all this was mystical, and I couldn't change it. And I remember my parents saying to me, "Well, doesn't Christianity also say honor your mother and father?" And I said, "Yes, that's true. But the first commandment is to love the Lord thy God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. So I have to honor God first, and I love you. But it was so difficult because I truly loved my parents, and I could see how heartbroken they were because they couldn't understand. But I knew the truth, and I had to follow it. There was no question. And so I did come into the Catholic Church, and my son was 16 at this time, and he decided that he wanted to do the same. So we were baptized in the Catholic Church. We went through RCIA together. And my daughter, some years later, also got baptized in the Catholic Church. And then 2 years after my conversion, my sister, one of my sisters, also started having her experiences and came into the Catholic Church, and her daughter as well. And my grandmother, who I was very close to, had a dream 6 months before she passed away, and Jesus came to her. And my father, before he passed away, he wasn't feeling well. He was very sick, but he started seeing the face of Jesus on his prayer mat. When he would open his prayer mat to pray the namaz, the face of Jesus would appear there. And so it's just been incredible what Jesus has done. And of course, through all of this, he has led me to a place where I want to testify. You know, we overcome Satan by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And today, I have the honor to testify that Jesus Christ is Lord, and holy is his name. I would not be here today if it wasn't for the invitation of a woman who decided to just invite me to her church. And she never stopped inviting me. And sometimes I look back and I think, what if she had never invited me? And I think we forget the power of the invitation. Invite them. I want to put out this invitation to you. Come. Come and see. Whether you're a Christian, whether you are Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, atheist, or just seeking, agnostic, I would like to invite you to the Catholic Church to just come and see. Come and sit in a pew like I did and talk to him. And not me, but let him tell you who he is and how loved you are and what a personal relationship he wants with you. And experience this greatest love story that is waiting for you, wrapped in the greatest mystery of God. So come and see.